Dean Crook, the principal analyst at IQ. Today, we are going to talk about the 5 top horror lanes in North America and where they're going to go and what we can do to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. So before we get going here, because I think this topic is going to be one. I mean, we've already had a couple of comments this morning saying like Atlanta's got to be on that list somewhere, and we got some surprises for you. But Dean, I just have to say before we go anywhere, I've been getting so many people connecting with me over the last couple of weeks, saying that like Wednesday is their favorite show to watch because the way you take the information, the way you translate it into what is, but not only that, the way you give everybody a background context as to why this is happening. You know, as DJ knows, and you might not know, Dean, you know, all week we get guests for weeks to come. We've got pretty much all of March filled out for guests. And I was speaking to a customer yesterday, and he says, I listen to your show every day. He goes, I just love it. He goes, I put it on my way to work. He goes, that guy, Dean, he goes, he actually called, he said, you know, the guy with the English accent. I said, don't ever say that. He's Australian. And he says, yeah, I know. I actually asked a New Zealander friend of mine if it was he was Australian, and he lost his marbles.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that Quebec, Ontario kind of rivalry there. But,
you got it.
But he said, you know, Dan, he goes, that show to me, he goes like, 90% of it's not in my market. He goes, but he used to be in sales. So I actually coached this individual. And he says, if I was in sales, that would be gold. He goes he goes, do people really realize?
It really is. You coming on the show with us is really
insane.
Insane.
And he even said, he goes, like, do people really realize the value in that area? And it's funny because I know last week you and I had a conversation. I shared that information with a student, and the prospect that he sent it to, the information, just the data that came from your system when you know how to use it properly. We're talking a multi-million-dollar account was like, dude, we got to talk. If you can give me that kind of insight, we got to talk. So for everybody watching and listening, today's show, whether you're watching live right now at 9:03 a.m. on Wednesday, or if you're watching this afterwards, either on any of the social platforms or listening to it on the podcast, the information we're going to share with you today is the 5 biggest horror lanes in North America right now. So these are price increases, capacity drops, all of the above, what's to come, what's to expect. So get your pens and paper out, fire up Evernote, fire up your word processor, whatever you use.
That's
pay attention.
Because, take some notes, everybody.
Absolutely. If you have customers in these 5 areas, this is absolute gold. Or if you have customers that are looking to deliver to these areas, not necessarily in these lanes, but looking to deliver to these areas, there's strategy and understanding that's going to help your customer stay ahead of some of the challenges that we're going to talk about. So we got Wednesday is truly the best by Ryan. Yes, sir. I love learning from Dean. John says, good morning. And then Lisa says, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good Wednesday morning, is a bomb day. Like Wednesday is the shit. It is. It really is. I love it. All right. So
Monday's hump day, right?
What's that? And but you know what? What a better day to learn. Like, you know, you're halfway through the week, your head's kind of slagging. You've been beat up Monday and Tuesday by everybody. And Wednesday you come back.
This is a pickup for you.
Yeah. You're like Gladiator.
Data.
Yeah. You're like Russell Crowe in Gladiator. You know, you're coming back strong, baby. All right. So we have a couple of things that we're going to share with y'all. It's going to be a little bit of a different interactive day today. First lane that we're going to start with is Laredo to Toronto, Dean. So we've got some data pulled up.
Yep. So just sort of to level set, and good morning to everybody listening. You know, data is kind of interesting, but it's on its own. It really doesn't mean much, right? So you've got to put, if you don't tell the story around what the data means, it really doesn't mean much to people. So I think whenever you're talking to anybody in sales, what's important is to understand, you know, the data, you know, directionally what it's telling you, but also wrap that data in some context. And that's what I spend most of my time doing. Like, it's the why, because you've got to really say, well, why is that? And if you can explain that, then I think you can take the data and finagle it into your customer situation, depending on what sort of market they're in. So this first one's kind of fascinating, because this is Laredo to Toronto. I think we covered it maybe last week on last week's show. We talked a little bit about the the capacity shortage in the southern markets. So this is a great example. This is what we call Auto Alley, and Auto Alley is, of course, where a lot of those auto parts run through Mexico, through Laredo, up through San Antonio, and then they make their way up through Detroit into Toronto. The data point we shared last week was there were 65 auto parts manufacturers in Canada, and they owned 120 auto parts plants in Mexico. So you have a lot of cross-border freight, and as we said last week, a lot of that freight capacity, is dedicated, because you don't leave Toronto unless you've got a load sitting on a loading dock back in Laredo to come straight back, because you've got to load back across the border when you're northbound. So with the disruptions that have been happening because of all the protests, there's obviously less trucks traveling to the United States. That's meant there's been a capacity shortage on these lanes. And this one's fascinating, because just have a look at the chart. At best, this lane averages, I'm going to take a guess and say, about $1.48 a mile for January to December last year. A little bit of an uptick to January, $1.68, but look at the steep increase since then. And I think that's just extraordinary how much rates have jumped, because remember, this is a lane that's got a lot of contract freight on it, so it's dedicated two-way capacity. But when that capacity that coming south decreases, shippers that are looking for that regular contract capacity will have to go to the spot market. And that's why spot rates are surging in that particular part of the market. Now, if I have a look at Ratecast, just to wrap up this one, our Ratecast 52-week forecast has got this lane at about 281 a mile. These are line haul without fuel, 281 a mile in March. And it really sits around that level all the way through to June, July. And of course, what happens then, and you probably know this, but the produce season winds down, in that time of the year out of Mexico. So a lot of that inbound produce starts to fall away as our produce season comes on. So a lot of those refrigerated carriers that are busy hauling produce northbound out of Laredo and McAllen, Texas, will switch over to dry van. So you see an increase in capacity when produce season falls off out with the northbound volumes out of Laredo.
So, question for you, Dean. When we're looking at this, are we looking at then for the mid-June kind of area that you just talked about? So if we're sitting right now at $2.10 a mile, up $1.02 a mile in this last 2 weeks, are we saying it's going to go up another 80 cents a mile?
So let me just pull up what's the chart you've got there. Let me see the chart. You've got it at Laredo, Toronto. It's sitting at, so it's come down a little bit today. So it's come down a little bit off that high. Let me quickly look at that one, Laredo to Toronto. So let's say it's at 270 today, what Ratecast is forecasting is that to come back to about 270 average. Yeah, so it's going to come back a little bit, Dan, but it's going to stay high. It looks like the Ratecast is forecasting this lane to stay high. And this would be seasonally normal, I think, for it to stay high during this part of the year, because the flip side happens here when reefer carriers are busy hauling refrigerated produce. It tightens up total truckload capacity in the dry van sector, because those reefer trailers can haul dry van and reefer freight. You can't do it vice versa. So you see in a lot of markets, you see a shift when produce season's busy. You see dry van capacity decrease, because a lot of those reefer carriers are hauling dry freight. Reefer freight instead of the dry freight. So yeah, it's going to be until produce season 275 July 3, and then it starts to slide.
Okay.
So that's the seasonality on that lane.
Okay. All right. So anyone has any questions on that? Let us know.
Shoot them in the messages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our dry van rates on DAT. So you think about, this is a national average. We scrub out all of the highs and lows. We look for density on lanes. We make sure it's a representative sample that shippers, carriers, and brokers are sending in for loads moved. So to be clear, these aren't rates based on load posts on load boards, which can be ridiculous. Actually, loads moved by carriers. They've accepted the rate. They've negotiated the rate with the broker, and that's the average rate. So you'll see if you look at long-term dry van rates, they peak in June. And a lot of people say, well, why do dry van rates peak in June? And of course, it's because the same phenomenon happens where refrigerator capacity is hauling reefer freight at the peak season and not hauling dry freight like they would the rest of the year.
Okay. Now we're going to get into the other secondary portion of Automotive Alley that we're going to talk about, which is Buffalo to Columbus.
Yeah.
Now I'm actually blown away. Up $1.57 a mile in the last 2 weeks. How does one even plan a shipping budget around this type of data? Like,
I don't know
crazy.
I don't know that you can, Dan. I think this is one of those things where it's like we're a week away from the anniversary of the polar vortex, which disrupted the freight market last year. You can't plan for that. And I think protests like this, no one planned for this, especially the duration and the fact that it's over now. I think for all intents and purposes, when we think about the big bridge crossings in Ontario. So I think that part of it, that'll take another week for that to iron out. But I think you'll see these rates come back down very quickly. But clearly this has got to do with, I think, anecdotally, carriers have told us that we haven't been sending our capacity to that part of the country. So if you have carriers not going to the Buffalo market, for example, because they just want to avoid that area, because they're worried that volumes are down. So you can see why capacity tightens pretty quickly. It's only 330 miles. So, it's not even a day's work, and it's hard to do a round trip and get unloaded in the same day on that lane. So it's one of those difficult lanes where you've got to get a really good rate to cover a day's work. It's not enough miles really for a full day's work. But if you're in a flatbed or a dry van and you're spending too much time on a loading dock, you need a really good rate per mile. It's, if it was around 500 miles, you might see a different scenario in terms of weekly, tractor miles, where you've got a target maybe of 3,000 miles a week. Every hour is absolutely critical. So when you see these short haul lanes like this, you're going to see rate volatility. And it's not so much because of the rate per mile. It's the fact that you can't get enough miles in a day because of the markets that you're working in. So I think if you look at Ratecast, the long-term 52-week prediction there is, if we're sitting at, what's that number there, Dan? I can't quite see it. What's it averaging today?
$4.95 plus a 45-cent increase.
Okay, so $4.95. So Ratecast has got it coming back to about $4.11 by the 20th of March. And then it drops right away in April, cools right down, doesn't start to get back to the same levels it's at today until September. But then it stays elevated all year based on our forecast. And remember, these Ratecast forecasts, we have a mean average error of around 5 to 6%. So that means they're kind of in that 94%, 95% accuracy. So what it means is if you said, the rate today is going to be X, and then we plotted all of those, we studied all of the predictions over 14 days, we'd be, 95% accurate in terms of what happened versus what we predicted would happen. So they're pretty reliable forecasts for pricing purposes.
Got it. And is that because once the protests kind of die down, once things start transitioning where produce is going south instead of north, then it's going to kind of open up capacity in that lane?
Yeah, I think people will be less afraid to send their trucks to places where they'll get caught up, get held up for whatever purpose, whatever reason. So capacity is very fickle like that. I often liken it to, especially in the spot market. It's like, when you had young kids and you go and play soccer and they kind of follow the soccer ball around like a little,
yes,
they all follow the ball.
They're all, it's just a big group together.
Yeah, capacity's a bit like that. When the rates are hot in an area, they kind of gravitate to those areas, especially the carriers that chase seasonal freight. So that's why we said last week, what's the weather? Weather's a really good indicator. Ground temps, wind temps, ocean temps, all those things are very important indicators.
100%. So Ryan says I booked 3 Toronto to Mesquite, Texas this week, and even those rates were extremely high.
Right. Yeah. Fewer trucks available to go south. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so John, WW means week over week.
Yeah. Week over week. Sorry about that, John. That's my shorthand. Yep.
It's funny, eh? You talk to, like, in every world, there's shorthand. Like in every single niche, right? And I remember when I first got into this industry, somebody would say something to me and they'd go, "Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?" And I'd be like, Yeah. And I have no clue.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're in meetings and everything, and it's because somebody in Ohio has a shorthand, it's WW, right? And I'm like,
right.
and I'm in my head, I'm going, WWF? Like, are you
Yeah,
talking about the Worldwide Wrestling Federation or what? Like, is Hulk Hogan or Randy Savage going to break through the door at any moment? Kind of thing, yeah. Am I going to get George the Animal Steel biting on the back of my head thinking it's a turnbuckle?
All the favorites. All the favorites.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It was hilarious, but
on Ryan's point there, it's I think for everyone thinking about the cross-border freight volumes, because a lot of trucks work on, because of distance, right? Because they work on sort of weekly cycles. I know a lot of people want to get home on weekends, so I think there's a weekly cadence to volumes that leave and return. Especially, I think maybe the New England Maritimes guys are probably home, they probably do a round trip every 3 days. So I think it'll take another week for capacity to come back to the market. It could take more, right? So weather permitting, but it's not going to, you just don't have the protest end on Sunday and then suddenly capacity's back in the market. It takes a while for people to get back in the groove, back in the cycle.
Because they have to get the orders, then they have to go load them, then they have to go down south. And if it's a load that's delivering Monday, they're not leaving on a Wednesday to go to Laredo for Monday. They're going to leave on the Friday. And then so, you get like when I was at Transcend, at one point we had 165 trucks. And it was a very rigid schedule. Like I was I came from a broker to an asset based, and I was actually blown away at the amount of organization. Like I just always, for some reason, thought, well, you have a driver, he's going to be back in a day, you get a load. And it's like, no, he's going to be back in the day, we're going to get a load. But what we're going to do is to save him 6 hours because he won't be able to make delivery, and then he'll have the 36-hour reset, and he wants the 36-hour reset on the weekend, not on Friday. We're going to send a city driver to Windsor, and they're going to switch trailers in Windsor, and it's like, and I'm like, whoa, and there's like so much more in the background that happens. That as a broker, unless you're fully engulfed in the
unless you're really working,
you have no idea. Right.
I mean, it's pretty easy math, right? If you want to know,
Lisa has a good question as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. It's the so RateView is our flagship product where we have all of our rates for all of the 65,000 lanes, and Ratecast is the forecasting tool that can forecast rates out 8 days or 52 weeks. So it's our forecasting tool. We use at least 5 years of data across 65,000 lanes to come up with what our forecast is. So, it's been surprising. At least it's a great question, because I've been surprised how accurate it's been in the pandemic when all of the basic economic fundamentals have been thrown out the window. It's been absolutely amazing what we've seen in terms of how consistent rates have been in our forecasting tool. So they're good ones to use. From shippers use them when they're looking at RFPs to figure out where should they be thinking about carrier bids. So if you're doing, if you're in broker sales and you're putting in an RFP and you're bidding on lanes for shippers, it's a really good tool to tell you where long-term rates sit, and then it comes down to the negotiation piece.
Definitely, definitely a great tool as well. So this tool is new to me, but especially if you have those customers that are wanting you to stick on rates for 6 months or something crazy. I mean, you really want to use something like this to know.
It's a good guide.
Yourself.
Yeah, it's a great guide. Yeah,
and even go a step further with that. Yeah, I believe it adds a massive amount of credibility to the conversation. If you can sit with a shipper, and we've got some things in the works for everybody watching that we're trying to get DAT to come and work with us to get all of our listeners a discount on this program, because I think it's absolutely mandatory. As a salesperson, if you're on the phone with a customer and you can type in their origins and destinations and understand the system to a point where it's a tool, not a chore, that's primary. And then do like what Dean does, where he says, well, week over week, this lane's gone up $1.50. And what is the case for that? Well, let's look at what's going on in the background. Let's look at the rate view. And you can have that conversation with a prospect. You think of that image, credibility, and brand it brings to you in their market, right? It's a really expensive lane. Well, actually, in the last 3 months, it's gone up over 82%. And, so here's a couple of the things that point to this data telling us this. And here's the long-term view. Long-term view, you can expect some decreases in May, June, and July. And if you think about that conversation over the conversation the last person had, hey, can I get your lane so I can give you a quote?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you got somebody that wants to quote you or somebody that fully understands the routes you run.
Yes.
What is the dynamics of them? What's the future possible? I mean, obviously,
right. Now there's a series. There's another chart behind this, that Lisa can't see, which is the contract rates. Right. So these are the spot rates that represent about 20% of the freight moved. And contract rates, of course, are negotiated with RFPs, in advance. So this year's contract rates are moving on RFPs that were negotiated late last year. So contract rates are rates that are a rate agreed to move X number of loads across the entire year based on the capacity you supply. Think about contract rates as the climate. Spot rates are the weather. That's how you think about right. So the spot rate is what's the weather today. Now, the next part of what we're building, and we probably should figure out how to show this. You could talk to Ken next week. We're building a product that'll be like a true rate type product, which will be what's the rate for this lane, this shipment. So it'll be a shipment level where you could type in Buffalo, Columbus, and it'll tell you what the rate is today on that lane based on, detention times, all sorts of things that go into that specific lane. Whereas what we've shown you in rate view is what the average rate is on that lane over time. So because the part what you really want to get to, and I think more shippers are moving towards more dynamic pricing, is what's the rate going to be today? And the more accuracy you can build into that, I think the more shippers can understand how to control their procurement costs, which is what their primary goal is, of course, other than moving freight on time.
Now, Dean, would you not also say that, if you had the data on contract rates over spot market rates, and having that data and sharing that data with a prospect saying, listen, I know you haven't done an RFP, but I can handle all of this volume for you. And what I can do is I can put it into a contract rate form. Contract rates right now are 25% cheaper than spot rates. So if you're wondering why you're paying so much, I understand that so many people have kind of screwed you over when it comes to dedication or securing capacity or guaranteeing capacity, but I'll do it, and I'll do it at a contract rate. I'm immediately pulling 25 points off the board for you.
Right.
Best way to explain it to them as well is think of it like buying gas. If we could have prepaid for a year of gas 3 years ago, or even 5 years of gas before gas went nuts, you think everybody would have done it? Yeah, probably would, right? So,
I mean, on Laredo to Toronto, contract rates minus fuel are sitting at $2.29. Spot rates are higher, so that's sort of telling you that on that dedicated lane, there's more volume flooding over to the spot market.
Yeah, because right now we've got spot market rates at $2.70 based on our data. So you're going from $2.29 to $2.70 on contract versus spot rates. And again, we go back to the conversation we had with Joe Lynch. Transparency is key.
Right.
So we're going to do a cost plus. We're going to do a cost plus 10, a cost plus 12, a cost plus 15.
Well, and that's
right?
I'm glad you mentioned that new feature with the true cost. I mean that gets us really to the point of you could have almost true transparency.
We're looking for beta customers. We have an RFP tool where brokers send in all of their lanes, and we can help them with actually building out what the rates would be based on the lanes that we've got here in Ratecast. So there's a lot of ways that brokers can go about this. Of course, it's all subscription based, so it's not free, but it's a really good. Data is important. It's a good investment, I think, in terms of building your margins and building relationships with customers. So
data is what?
Well, listen.
Data is what?
That is gold.
That is the new oil. Come on, boys.
New oil.
Come on. This is like from second one, that is the new oil.
Tony Robbins said it best. Leaders anticipate, losers react. We're trying to make you guys all leaders.
Knowledge is power, Lisa. You're absolutely right. Ryan says he's got a question. John says absolutely. With this data that we take back to our customers, do you feel as a broker it's better to go cost plus model? I believe 1,000%, Ryan. Listen, if you go, so here's the thing is, if we look at, call it the last 18 months, right? And you look at what we've faced, right? We've faced the whole, brokers are scumbags. They're holding these huge margins while it's a pandemic and the carriers are doing all the work. We move to things like Maersk, Zim, HayPag saying we're starting our own 4PLs because our rates have not gone up 800%, but for containers that people are charging $26,000 for, they're saying they're still charging $8,000. Like, there's all these quote unquote conspiracy theories, right? Rates started rising in the markets. Carriers stopped talking about brokers and how much margin they're making. So everyone you talk to is going to have a different opinion. I fully believe if you walk into a prospect and you say, here's my model, price goes up, your price goes up, but price goes down, your price goes down. And when you talk to brokers, and this is just across the board, and this is generalizing, but it's 100%. When brokers' costs go up, when the costs come down, very few brokers put that cost savings back to their customer because they've established a rate, right? Yeah. So for me, if you run with a cost plus model, we've spoken to how many customers on this show? I've spoken to dozens of customers off the air, and you guys have seen it. I've set the conversation up where what's the percentage? And they're talking 12 to 15%. Right. Most customers would be comfortable with you making 12 to 15%. Now, some companies say I want 20, 22%, and maybe because they're not managing their expenses properly, but 12 to 15%, you do a cost plus. Personally, I believe you have completely dominated that market because your immediate transparency on everything. And I mean, I'll give you the carrier invoice with my 12% or my 15% that you agree to. And maybe some lanes, you say, okay, listen, we have extra in here. It's going to be 17% on this lane. It's going to be 10% on this lane because the margin or the customer's paying us less. That's the conversation. But when you use, you're asking what the subscription called, it's called Rate View. And when you're using tools like this, you can actually show that data to your customers and say, hey, guys, here's last year's revenue. Now, if we add 12%, this would have been your budget last year. What did you spend? Oh, you spent 22% more. So a cost plus model will work. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? And that's where data
and the cost plus model is giving total transparency. So, so to lose that customer, here's the key. I mean, you want to talk about a pipeline sealer, do a cost plus. I mean, you're still going to have to fill your pipeline because customers are still going to leave here and there. But if you're not taking huge rips from them and you're literally just showing them exactly what they're expecting and what to pay.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, Ryan, come on, Ryan, you don't make Ryan rips. Like let's call a spade, brother. You're honest and you have integrity with your customers, but I get it. LOL. Listen,
he's talking about brokers.
In today's market, let's look at the mentality of our customers, right? There's been more money spent in the last 16 months on logistics than they can count in history, right? But meaning increases, companies for the first time ever the majority of them are losing money over making money, and we've spoken to companies, like we've had them on the show where it's like, you talk about John Brewer who's saying, guys, like logistics just isn't, the food, it's the salt and pepper packets. It's like, there's a lot that goes with it. Costs are going up everywhere. The dwell times are at an all-time high. I had a conversation with some of the people in Inception the other day, and it was like, develop a cost that shows all the accessorials, because this gentleman was like, you don't believe it, Dan, like we're 84 hours on the dock. And I said, what's the problem? He says, it's manpower. And I said, okay, so here's what I would do. And here was my suggestion. And if any of you are facing this, I suggest you do this as well. You take the last 2 months of accessorial charges and you add that up. And I guarantee you it'll be more than paying the people they have or increasing salaries in the warehouse by $2, $3, $4 an hour. It'll be way more. When you keep a truck for 84 hours, everyone that does your freight after that wants 3 times the cost because they know they're 84 hours. Your accessorial charges are astronomical, but there's different ways to skin that cat. And when you have the data, you have the gold. Right. Dean, my first interaction with Dean was when Dean sat on the panel at the TCA in 2019 before COVID even happened. And the first thing you said, Dean, was data is the new oil. And I remember, because I'm in the middle of posting on LinkedIn, because I just finished taking pictures of, I forget the presenter that was before you, taking pictures of their PowerPoint presentation. And I just kind of stopped and I looked up and I went, holy crap, I got to meet this guy. Because wow. So, I mean, that's where I believe the market's going anyways.
Right,
And I believe
right.
the first people that are to the market are going to be the victors in it. Because then it's all going to be about cost plus. But what are you willing to take? Are you willing to take 10 over 12 over 15? Are you willing to take 8? Are you willing to take 6? Like there's
right.
right.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
There's some more questions. I think
Builds trust.
trust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Morning, Jeff. Jeff says, Dean, what's your opinion regarding RFPs and long-term contract stability, sustainability due to the market volatility?
Yeah, tough one. Shippers have reacted very differently in the last year. They've carved out a lot of their core lanes and gone to RFPs to lock in capacity and let a lot of lanes. See, shippers, when they go put out these RFPs, there's a lot of lanes that have 1 or 2 loads a week. And there's a lot of lanes that actually end up being ghost lanes. No freight moves on them, even though there's an RFP rate in there. So what shippers have been doing is they've sort of stuck to this core volume and let all the other volume go to brokers, 3PLs, spot market, the 1 to 2 loads a week. That's been a massive trend in the last year. How sustainable? I think the rates negotiated now are quite sustainable because this market will turn, capacity will loosen. It's already showing signs of loosening. So I think the shippers will start to get back some pricing power over time. And to Jeff's point, there definitely has been a switch from contract carriers moving in the spot market to take advantage of some of the higher rates, but
100%.
not as much as what you would normally think, because the double-digit rate increases they've been giving to shippers have come with higher commitments to honour the obligation to move those loads. Now that said, carriers on average are only accepting 3/4 of all the loads they get in. They're still rejecting about 1/4 of them. So that's been the problem that has been persisting through the pandemic. But
we want to go to
yeah.
we want to go to those other lanes. I know.
Yeah, and then Ryan, we'll come back and answer your question in just a minute. So we did Buffalo, Columbus. Let's do good old Atlanta, Orlando. And Jessica, if you're watching, here's your Atlanta. We put out a post this morning, Dean, saying, and I kind of gave half of each lane as to what it was, and Jessica came back and said Atlanta's got to be on that list because it's a nightmare.
Yeah, Atlanta's a big distribution market, right? So it's sort of a hub for truckload carriers, a lot of interstates, a big intermodal rail network comes in and hubs in Atlanta. If you think about Atlanta as a distribution point in the Southeast, 85 million people live within 500 miles of Atlanta. And that includes right down to Lakeland, Orlando, not quite to Miami, but in a normal day, you can deliver freight out of Atlanta with a truck to all of those markets. So it's a big distribution market. A lot of freight comes in from Chicago in particular. If I have a look at that lane, Atlanta, it's our busiest lane in both the dry van and the refrigerated space in particular. Dan, have we got reefer up there? I can't quite see it.
This is reefer. Yeah. Atlanta to Orlando, return on reefer.
Yeah, so I look at this lane as a bit of a kind of a benchmark to see what capacity looks like in refrigerated. So it's been sitting at about $4.30 a mile since last August. So it's capacity's been pretty tight for 440 miles. That's a difficult lane. Again, it's kind of that tweener lane where you can get it done in a day, but you can't. You've got to be very careful in terms of time to get unloaded and then reloaded the same day. So it's a lane that's fairly difficult because you've got Atlanta traffic and Orlando traffic. So 440 miles is right at that outer limit where it's hard to get a trip done and unload and a reload, or certainly an unload to get ready to reload the next morning. Rates are down to 353 this morning, average in the last 7 days. So they're off about 80 cents on the January average, and if it's 353 today, Ratecast has got them. Rates will go up typically between now and March, and that's of course produce season. A lot of truckload volume will coming out of the Southeast. If you think about when does the US produce season get going, the starting line really is in the Southeast when it gets warmer in April. So that's why you see capacity tighten up until then. Once you get to peak produce season, it's up around $4.43 a mile all the way through to December. So it's going to be a lane. Orlando is going to be a very tight lane for, I think, the rest of the year. Northbound rates have been dropping a little bit. That's why the southbound lane's been dropping. That's why the northbound lane's been increasing to compensate. But we've got what have you got the return at there, Dan? Chicago, Atlanta. Yeah, it's at 345. I'll quickly look at what it's got.
But
So
Chicago, Atlanta. So we've got spots are at a
sorry,
12-month
Orlando.
high.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I was just looking at that one there. So northbound though, so if you're in broker sales and you're trying to get capacity, northbound out of Florida, anytime between now and peak produce season in May, going to be really, really hard. You're going to pay a lot for it. The average on our rate cast is $3.44 a mile, as high as $3.65.
Wow.
So that's peak. That's the peak this year. That's normal seasonal produce activity, because that's sort of the end of the produce season, because it gets too hot in Florida after that. Anytime up until that, capacity is going to be very tight. Again, that capacity that's in Orlando and Miami after produce season moves further north up towards Georgia, and that's when you see capacity tighten there.
Okay, and then we've also got Chicago to Atlanta, 12-month high, $1.07 a mile year over year. Chicago to Atlanta, that number is just insane.
It's a pretty busy lane. Remember, all of your Class 1 railroads hub in Chicago. I think something like 30% of all rail movements arrive in Chicago and get hubbed there to be sent to the East Coast. So you see a lot of volume from Seattle. Los Angeles comes into Chicago. All the Class 1 railroads then have to have different share with different railroads, and the freight gets moved across different rail networks. But capacity's been very tight on that lane in particular in the last year. In the refrigerated sector, it's been incredibly tight. So if I look at Chicago, today it's at $4.75 a mile for refrigerated capacity. It's up 5 cents on the January average. That's a 12-month high. So refrigerated capacity out of Chicago to Atlanta is at a 12-month high today. That is $4.75. That's 60, 70. That's $1.40 a mile higher than this time last year.
Holy cow.
Crazy.
Yeah, we've still got some of the. This is a fairly typical pattern for this time of the year, though, based on what's been happening in the market. A lot of lanes have got very tight capacity and a lot of volatility based on regional weather patterns or other things that could be going on geopolitically.
So then to finish this off, we got Gary, Indiana to Pittsburgh, 12-month high, up 95 cents a mile on a flatbed. Yeah,
Gary, Indiana is, for those that don't know, Gary, Indiana, of course, is just around from Chicago. It's 30% of our steel is manufactured there. So all the rolled steel, plate steel, coil steel comes out of Gary, Indiana. You see all the steel works when you're there. Pittsburgh's obviously another big steel market for a lot of finished products. Rates are they're at $3.94 today. So that's up about 30 cents a mile since December, based on this morning's numbers. That will have changed from some of the numbers you're looking at now, because they kind of change daily depending on as our contributions are coming in from all the loads being moved. But that's slightly less than where it's been most of the year. It's been up around $4 a mile for most of the year, and long-term forecasts got it sitting at about $3.44 in March, but remaining around the $3.30 level the rest of the year.
Which is in the normal range based on the
normal range, yes. So what you're seeing today is sort of some of those extraordinary volatility that can be driven by weather in those markets.
Okay. So I know we're running a little long today, everyone, and I think 5 lanes is probably a little too much every week, but we want to give you as much content as possible. We want to give you as much data and knowledge as possible. Dean, Ryan says, so go about getting the data consistently with customers. What does the process look like to truly be a resource, not an order taker?
The process in terms of getting access to the tool is to be contacting someone in sales. I can connect you with someone in sales to talk through the different pricing models depending on the level of access. So if they want to contact you, Dan, I can make that happen.
Sure. So if you guys want to send me a DM or something, or an email, if you got my email, whatever, send me an email and we'll get you the contact for costing inside that. And then what would it look like? Would it be more of learning the system and kind of entering the data, origin, destination, commodity? What would that look like?
Super, super easy. You just it's a UI, so you've got a user interface. You get a login access to our portal, and then you just type in the different origin destination pairs and the equipment type, and it gives you everything there on the screen. So it's a really easy system to use.
Beautiful. That's
awesome. Then Jeff, are you in agreement that a lot of asset-based carriers are moving their assets from contracts to the spot market to generate revenue? 100%. And it happens all the time, everywhere, every year. You know, you have produce customers, or you have carriers that can haul produce. I mean, I remember back in the day when melons used to start, like watermelons and stuff used to start. It was just vented dry vans, and I can't tell you how many carriers would stop at the local, TSC store and buy vents and a rivet gun and cut a hole in the side of their trailer and just rivet in vents, and they all of a sudden get, you know, an extra $3,000 an order just because they have vents.
Just because,
you know. I do, but I also think that you know, for those of you that might face that challenge, because it's a really serious question that Jess asked, really, when you look at it. You know, my conversation with suppliers that I dedicated freight to has always been, listen, I understand you get more money. What I will do is, if I can, I'll pay, you know, if going rate's $1,500, let's agree to $1,600 all year round. That extra $100 a load at 5 loads a week, that extra $2,000 a month, when come produce season, when it's 4 weeks of produce season, I've already taken care of you. So don't let me down in those 4 weeks to try and make more money. And that's, again, all about relationship. And I know why Jeff asked that question, because he's bang on, because it's what a lot of people are saying. Well, you know, and especially, like, if you look at 2018,
how good of a relationship do you have? It's the relationship. You're right.
But here's where I think a lot of people have bad taste in their mouth, and I'm sure, you know, knowing Jeff's what kind of business Jeff has done and does, he probably been faced with it. You know, in 2018, there was a massive amount of RFPs that came out, and in 2019, 90%, 95% of those RFPs were trashed. Because spot market rates were half the price of what RFPs were. And I think when we look at that, you know, it puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And the asset carriers are going to say the same thing. Listen, I book a load with you for $1,000. I got a call back 20 minutes later saying customer canceled. We know you booked it with somebody for 900. You know what I mean? So it's a give and take. But I agree. I think it's, you know, there is going to be carriers that are going to go to the spot market for more money. Now, I know we've been way long today, and I apologize, but I think the data that Dean's driven is good. You know, Ryan says, thanks, you guys. I'm better set up for my day. Better because of this. Perfect, Ryan. That's why we're here. DJ, pull us out of here with the
Take
quote,
us out
brother.
again. Thank you to the mad scientists of logistics, DAT Data. Like and subscribe down below. Sales Chatter Live. We're live Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Again, Wednesdays are the greatest day. We have the mad scientists with us. And to follow us, to lead us out, I have a pretty good quote, I think. Lazao, anticipate the difficult by managing the easy.
Love it. Love it.
Data will help.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.